Klingon bird of prey decloaking directly behind us.
Red alert, shields up. Fire torpedoes, full spread. As many as we can.
As many as we can, Captain? That takes some time to animate.
Just fire as many as we can afford.
Hey, and welcome to Making FX BTS. I mean behind the scenes. Don't worry, I'm not getting all K-pop. For my recent tutorial, I made the vignette you just watched for the opening of that video. I used a lot of different techniques there, some of which I've covered before, but there were others I've not touched on, so I thought you might appreciate this making of. I started by grabbing a couple of models from Alex 3D. Alex provides C4D models with texture files, so it was easy enough to import these into Element 3D. I much prefer animating in Element as it's easy to make changes and see what the final scene will look like. I did initially start with the models on the same layer, but ended up duplicating the element layer and only displaying one on each. I also added a sphere shape to serve as the Enterprise's shield, but more on that in a moment. Because I was using Element, I could then make use of its create null options to create a null for each ship, and so it then became simple to set up all the animation in a single comp, using cameras to switch between views. I was deliberately sticking to simple movements, the sort of thing you'd see in TNG era motion control. The Enterprise only ever flies in a straight line here, so rather than constantly tweaking the position keyframes, I use the expression loop out continue, which keeps the starship moving. I did the same for the bird of prey, using a curved motion path that straightens out. Sticking all the animation in a single scene and using that expression meant that I could focus on positioning each camera and maintaining continuity. You can see from the timeline having active camera selected means that the highest camera in the timeline is the dominant one, with the in point for that camera determining the view. I trimmed the out points too, just to make it simple to tell which camera was being used. I kept the cameras static, except for this one, which didn't really work. It looks like the Enterprise is climbing, but I was trying to keep the bird of prey inside the Nebula background. Speaking of which, for the Nebula, I jumped into Particle Illusion and used this emitter, V-Bloom, which looks pretty good already, but I changed its shape to box. This produces a more spread out look, and you can see more detail. I rendered out 10 seconds of this at 30 frames per second. It's moving quite quickly, so I then used the stretch column to change the stretch factor to 1000%, so 10 times slower. This ends up looking quite jerky, but if you right click on the layer and go to Frame Blending, Pixel Motion, suddenly you get this awesome slow moving nebula. What's cool about this is it becomes really hard to see the changes unless you're watching it, so when you're focusing on the foreground action, you just get this sense of movement, like you might get if you were filming in a field or with clouds. For nebulas it might not be scientifically accurate, but it looks far more dynamic. Once I was happy, I positioned a few copies of the video in 3D space, pushed way back and scaled up. I also added a sunlight, so I made sure to make these layers material options set to not accept lights. The reason I bothered with a nebula background is that the bird of prey is quite dark against the black of space, and I wanted to make sure the audience could tell what was going on. The decloaking effect was achieved with keyframes on the opacity, and I added a turbulent displace effect to get that ripple. I keyframed the amount to reduce in line with the opacity. The bird of prey's weapons were the beam effect. The length was just 10%, and I keyframed the time to get the beam to travel. Setting the start and end widths gave me the look of the beams moving closer or further away. For the shield hit, I already mentioned that I used a sphere distorted in Element to get the oval look from the series. I then used an Essential Graphics pre-comp for its texture, which let me position the shield hit on the oval, lining up the hit and beams. Shortly after doing this, I sunk my head into my hands, realizing I was making this short to show off my tutorial for exploding on impact, but at least I get to share with you a different option. I think I've covered the photon torpedoes quite extensively in the other video, but for the explosion, rather than break apart the model and try to animate the pieces, I used the shatter effect. First, I took a still of the bird of prey and brought this into Photoshop. You can use custom image maps for the shatter effect, and to do this, all you need is different colours. So I had some fun with a dry effect brush, drawing over the model to isolate the bridge and wing guns to remain intact, and this helped produce a slightly more realistic breakup. At the point of the explosion, I swapped out the element layer for the still, and positioned a couple of stock footage explosions behind and scaled up. If you remember, I showcased the explosion glow preset in my quick cheats video, so I used this now to get the light to wrap around the Klingon ship, and that led to the final shot. The shatter effect has been overlooked in recent years, with 3D becoming easier in After Effects, but it's still a useful option when you need it. And that's it. A lot of tweaking and sound effects help sell the outcome. Those were my voices just played about with using Audition to get Mr. Worf's deep voice. I've not really gone into detail here, but let me know in the comments if you'd like to learn more about any of the elements used. And if there are any BTS fans still watching, I purple you, and all my subscribers.